Good afternoon, and we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Dean Bonner. I'm the Associate Survey Director here at the Public Policy Institute of California. For those of you who are not familiar with PPIC, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank with offices in San Francisco and here in Sacramento. We have to thank the James Irvine Foundation and the PPIC Donor Circle for their funding of this particular survey. And we would like to thank the PPIC Corporate Circle and the PPIC Donor Circle for helping make this event possible, including the great lunch that everyone is enjoying. But don't worry, I had a piece of beer bread earlier, so go back for seconds. Don't worry about me, I'm fine. So on your chairs, you should have received a document that contains some of the key findings of the survey, along with some charts. The full survey, as well as crosstabs and time trends, are available on the PPIC website. I know at least a few people in the audience use them on a regular basis. Later today, because we love surveys, you will all receive a survey via email. Please take time to do that. Your input really helps kind of for us as we plan our events and take into consideration everything that happens. And finally, after I'm done talking, there'll be some time for some Q&A in case anyone has any questions. Alrighty. Oh, and I should add, please silence or turn off your phone. That would be great. The mission of the statewide survey is to provide timely, relevant, and nonpartisan data on political, social, and economic issues and opinions. We aim to inform and improve the policy-making process, raise awareness, and encourage discussion. We talk to all Californians, not just registered voters or likely voters, and we do that to provide a voice for all Californians in the important state policy discussions and debates. Since we began in 1998, we've interviewed over 350,000 Californians, and we've done over 170, probably closer to 180 surveys over those years. So this survey and the general series of the Californians in their government series is funded by the James Irvine Foundation as well as the PPIC Donor Circle. This survey was actually fielded, it began just a few days after the election and finished up right before Thanksgiving. We called cell phones and landlines, and in this day and age, we actually called 70% on cell phones. We talked to about 1,700 Californians, and that has about a margin of error of 3.3%. And we talked to nearly 1,100 likely voters, and there's a margin of error of 4.1% for those findings. The report is broken up into two sections, a front section that looks at the state post-election landscape, that looks at state elected officials, fiscal choices, and policy priorities, and a back half that focuses more on the federal post-election landscape, which looks at federal elected officials, immigration policy, as well as the role of government. So as we head into 2019, 1 in 5 Californians name jobs in the economy as the most important issue facing the state. And that's reflected somewhat in the findings when it comes to how Californians view the state, the direction of the state, and how they view the future economic conditions. As you can see, there's a slightly higher positive views of how the state is, the direction of the state compared to how they feel about the economy. And positive views about the direction of the state have eclipsed 50%, dating all the way back to December 2014, while you have to go back to October 2014 to find this low of a level of optimism about the economy. And so This is a situation where the state is currently in the second longest economic expansion in state history, and so there is at least some wariness among Californians and economists about what direction the state is headed economically. Democrats are especially likely to be optimistic about the direction, and Republicans are pessimistic on both measures, but actually have more positive views about the economy, which is somewhat interesting. On both measures, San Francisco Bay Area residents are the most positive, and Inland Empire residents are the most pessimistic. Men and women hold similar views about the direction of the state, but men are 12 points more likely than women to expect good times financially. White Californians are the least likely to be optimistic on both of these measures, and we see differences across age groups as well. So as Governor Brown closes out his time in office, a historic end of his historic fourth term, half of Californians approve of his job performance. This is our 64th reading of his job performance. If we look back to January 2011, his initial reading, we were at 41% approval, so he's actually seen an increase of 10 points over those 8 years with some fluctuation. The legislature's approval is slightly below Brown's, which is a huge change from when Brown initially took office in January 2011. As I mentioned, Brown's approval has increased 10 points. However, the legislature's approval has increased 26 points since January 2011. Some of that has to do with the economic situation, the budget situation, but overall we've seen less conflict when it comes to policy measures, the budget, and those things have added up to a situation where we've seen the legislature's kind of views on the legislature rise. 2 in 3 Democrats approve of Governor Brown and the legislature, while fewer than 1 in 5 Republicans approve. Governor approval is highest in the San Francisco Bay Area at 61% and lowest in the Inland Empire at 41%. Similarly, the legislative approval is highest in the Bay Area at 55%, and lowest in Orange, San Diego, and in the Inland Empire, which is about 4 in 10. 6 in 10 African Americans and Latinos approve of Governor Brown, compared to half of Asians and 4 in 10 white Californians. We find that majorities of African Americans, Asian Americans, and Latinos approve of the legislature, while about half of whites approve. If we look at both of these questions together, and we find that 39% of Californians approve of both the legislature and Governor Brown, while 27% disapprove of both. So, a solid 4 in 10 are approving of both the legislature and the governor. So after a landslide victory with 62% support in an election which was just certified today, how do Californians feel about the plans and policies of Governor-Elect Gavin Newsom? 4 in 10 Californians approve, 1 in 4 disapprove, and about 1 in 3 say they haven't heard enough or they're just unsure of how to rate his plans and policies. As you might expect, partisans are divided and independents kind of mirror the overall findings. Newsom's plans and policies are approved by about half in the San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles, while nearly 4 in 10 in Orange, San Diego, and the Central Valley approve, and just 1 in 4 in the Inland Empire. About half of African Americans, Asian Americans, and Latinos approve, compared to about 1 in 3 whites. And approval of Brown tracks closely with how they feel about Governor Newsom, with about 6 in 10 who approve of Governor Brown approving of Newsom's plans and policies, while about 6 in 10 who disapprove of Brown disapproving of Newsom's plan and policies. So speaking of Governor Brown, we asked a question earlier this year and followed it up in this survey, looking at how Californians feel about whether Governor-Elect Newsom should continue the policies of Governor Brown or should he change to different policies. Today we find about half of Californians saying they want a change to different policies. But as you can see, a lot of that is being driven by Republicans who want to change to different policies, which aren't necessarily in line with what the plans and policies of Governor Newsom are. About half of more among African Americans and whites and Latinos want to see change, while a plurality of Asian Americans actually want a continuation of Governor Brown's policies. College graduates and those in households making more than $80,000 a year prefer continuing Brown's policies, while those with less education and affluency are looking for a change to different policies. So while California's economy is doing extremely well, there's also a growing economic divide that has been noted. And we find that about 2 in 3 Californians say that the state is divided into 2 economic groups called the haves and the have-nots. These findings were nearly identical each December from 2013 to 2015. However, in January 1999, just 56% said that the state was divided this way. So there's actually a 11-point drop in this finding. With such a high finding, it's not surprising that majorities across parties, regions, and demographic groups say that the state is divided into these 2 groups. And we find that African Americans, Democrats, and those with incomes greater than $80,000 are especially likely to say that the state is divided this way. So looking at how Californians kind of self-sort into these 2 groups, while most agree that the state is divided into these groups, it's not quite as clear on how they self-sort themselves. 4 in 10 Californians say that they're part of the haves, 45% say that they're part of the have-nots. Once again, findings were nearly identical on this measure in recent years. However, if we go back to 1999, 57% of Californians viewed themselves as part of the haves. So that's a 17-point drop since 1999, which is a long time ago, but still, that's a significant drop. About 6 in 10 African Americans and Latinos say they're part of the have-nots, while half of whites and 4 in 10 Asian Americans say they're part of the haves. The belief that a person is part of the haves increases sharply with rising income. We find that 1 in 4 of those with incomes less than $40,000 say that they're part of the haves, compared to 2 in 3 of those making more than $80,000 a year. Half of Californians in the San Francisco Bay Area say they're part of the haves, while half in the Inland Empire say they're part of the have-nots. And so this kind of geographic divide on this is very stark. 6 in 10 Californians with only a high school degree say they're part of the have-nots. 6 in 10 Californians with a college degree say that they're part of the haves. So once again, it's not only where you live, but also your education level is kind of playing a role in this self-sorting. Half of homeowners say they're part of the haves, while 6 in 10 renters say they're part of the have-nots. So once again, these are kind of overlapping things, right? Where you live, how much education you have, if you're owning a rent or renting your house, are all related to how you kind of view yourself in the greater economic situation. So while 2 in 3 Californians think that there are these 2 economic groups, just half say that government should do more to make sure that all Californians have an equal opportunity to get ahead. 4 in 10 say that people are already afforded with this equal opportunity. In recent years, findings were similar on this measure, with about half saying that the government should do more. However, if we go back to 1999 again, 52% of the people said that Californians already have this opportunity. So there's been a shift in kind of not only the role that they want government to play, but also kind of in this perception that all people have the opportunity to get ahead. And so that's, once again, a double-digit drop in that perception. As you might expect, there's a partisan divide. 7 in 10 Republicans say that people have an equal opportunity, while 2 in 3 Democrats say that government should do more. Women, about 6 in 10 women say the government should do more, compared to just under half of men that hold this view. 7 in 10 African Americans, 6 in 10 Latinos, and half of Asians want government to do more, while whites are divided on this issue, closely divided, with fewer than half saying do more or that they already have the equal opportunity. Wanting government to do more is higher among those with only a high school degree, those making under $40,000 a year, and those 18 to 34. And support for government doing more ranges from a high of 59% in Los Angeles to a low of 46% in the Central Valley. Among those who say the state is divided into these two economic groups, 7 in 10 say the government should do more. So among that 2/3, 7 in 10 say the government should play a larger role. So turning to the future, how do Californians perceive what the state will be like in 2025? This is a question that we kind of started asking back in 2006 when we had a Californians in the Future survey series. And obviously, perceptions of something, 19 years in the future is different than something 7 years in the future. But today, 4 in 10 Californians say that the state will be a better place in 2025. 1 in 3 say it will be a worse place. And 1 in 4 say that there will be no change. So in December 2014 and December 2012, about 4 in 10 thought that California in 2025 would be a better place. So findings that are similar to today. However, in 2006, we found that just 1 in 4 held this view. Partisans hold wildly different views, with 6 in 10 Republicans saying that it will be a worse place, while 45% of Democrats say that it will be a better place. Independents generally mirror the overall findings, with about 4 in 10 saying that the state will be a better place in 2025. Pluralities of those in the San Francisco Bay Area, in Los Angeles, and in Orange, San Diego say that the state will be a better place, while pluralities in the Central Valley and the Inland Empire say that it will be a worse place. Close to half of African Americans, Asian Americans, and Latinos say that the state will be a better place in 2025, while pluralities of whites say that it will be a worse place. So when we ask a question, once again, that we've asked a few times in the past about how do they perceive when children grow up today, will they be better off financially or worse off than their parents? We find that about half of Californians think that children who grow up here will be worse off than their parents. We find that 6 in 10 African Americans and whites say that that California children will be worse off, while about half of Asian Americans and Latinos say their children will be better off, or say that children in California. Pluralities across regions say that kids will be worse off. And interestingly, those with higher incomes are much more likely to say that children will be worse off in the future. And in fact, I was kind of, like we normally break our income finding into 3 groups: less than 40, 40 to 80, and over 80. And I was like, oh, there's probably something in the way that's broke. So I broke it down by basically going from 0 to 20 and in increments all the way up to 200,000 or more. And actually, those making less than $20,000 a year, almost half say that California children in the future will be worse off. But looking at that group of people who make $200,000 or more, it's 7 in 10 Californians of that income bracket saying that children would be worse off. So it's about a 20-point gap there, despite the fact that these are folks who are well off themselves. Among those who are born in the U.S., 58% of those Californians say that they expect children to be worse off, while about 35% of immigrants to the United States say that children be worse off. So that's definitely an issue, potentially of like perception of just a more positive attitude that you can find on a number of findings when it comes to immigrants. So as Governor-Elect Newsom looks to take office, the state is likely to have a multi-billion-dollar budget surplus, potentially is more than $15 billion surplus. How would Californians like the state to spend this money? So nearly 6 in 10 Californians prefer that there be an increase in funding for education and health and human services. 1 in 5 say that there should be paying down debt and adding to the reserve, while about 1 in 6 prefer this idea of one-time spending basically on infrastructure projects surrounding water, transportation. Not surprisingly, 2 in 3 Democrats would prefer an increase in kind of social service funding, while a plurality of Republicans want to pay down debt and build up the reserve, and 1 in 5 say that there should be an increase in one-time spending. Most independents say that they want an increase in funding on education and health and human services. Solid majorities of Latinos, Asian Americans, and African Americans say they want increased funding, compared to about 43% of whites. 2 in 3 women, compared to half of men, want increased funding in education and health and human services. And majorities across regions say that they want this increased funding in health and human services. In the immediate aftermath of the Great Recession, we asked a question that basically now that the state is on more solid footing, basically, should the state, increase funding for social service programs that were cut or pay down the debt and increase the reserve? And during that time, there was a more closely divided, with just under half normally saying that they wanted the return of funding to social services. And so given how well the state is doing, you're seeing an increase in that perception. So tax season right around the corner, we wanted to kind of get a read on how Californians are feeling about the state and local tax system. We find that half of Californians think that major changes are needed to the state and local tax system, while another 1 in 4 say that minor changes are needed. In recent years, findings have been similar. However, in 2010 and 2011, 6 in 10 Californians were saying that major changes are needed. And so now that we are kind of clear of the recession, Californians are a little less likely to say that these major changes are needed. And of course, we've also seen some tax increases already passed, whether that be the tax on higher income or the gas tax. So there has been some changes. So that perception that major changes are needed has actually decreased. 3 in 4 Republicans compared to 4 in 10 Democrats and half of independents say that major changes are needed. Looking outside of the San Francisco Bay Area, majorities say that major changes are needed. Fewer than half in the San Francisco Bay Area say that. About half of African Americans and Latinos and whites say major changes are needed, compared to just 1 in 3 Asian Americans. And about half across income groups say that major changes are needed. So there isn't a real big difference despite the kind of differential impact of taxes across income groups. So obviously Gavin Newsom, as he was running for governor, had some pretty big and ambitious policy ideas. And so we wanted to look at not only ones that he had mentioned, but others that have been mentioned over the recent years, as well as one that's kind of an ongoing project. And so what we found is that 6 in 10 Californians view the idea of universal health coverage as a high or very high priority. About half say the same about tuition-free community college or universal preschool, while just 1 in 4 have that kind of high or very high priority for building a high-speed rail system, which is kind of interesting considering A, there's already money there to be spent that is being spent, and B, it's kind of already begun to be built. But that is very interesting. Kind of consistent patterns present themselves, especially across the first 3 issues of universal health coverage, tuition-free community college, and universal preschool, with Democrats being much more likely, or far more likely, I should say, than Republicans, with independents kind of more in line with the way that Democrats feel. We find that basically majorities across regions rate universal health coverage as a high priority. There's big differences across racial ethnic groups with Latinos, Asian Americans, and African Americans more likely than whites to say that these things should be a priority. But looking at kind of the building the high-speed rail system, interestingly, just 22% of even Democrats view this as a high or very high priority, 8% of Republicans, and 23% of independents. Fewer than 3 in 10 across regions view this as a priority, and no more than a third across demographic groups view this as a priority. And so that would be definitely an interesting conversation as Governor-Elect Newsom begins to decide what he will want to do moving forward. So turning from the state to the federal post-election landscape, you'll immediately see a difference in the overall feelings of how people are feeling about the nation compared to the state. They aren't the exact same questions, but when asked if they're satisfied with the way that things are going in the United States, just 1 in 3 say that they are satisfied, with almost 2 in 3 saying that they're dissatisfied. Compare that to about the half of Californians who said the state was headed in the right direction. And so it's a pretty stark divide there. 8 in 10 Democrats say that and 7 in 10 independents, compared to 45% of Republicans, say that they're dissatisfied. Majorities across racial ethnic groups, including 8 in 10 African Americans, are dissatisfied with the way that things are going in the country. And dissatisfaction is much higher among women than men, and dissatisfaction increases with education. Findings in California aren't all that different than nationwide, where a November Gallup poll found just 35% of Americans nationwide satisfied with the way that things are going in the country at this time. Looking specifically at President Trump, in addition to not being satisfied generally, 7 in 10 Californians have just some or no confidence in President Trump to make the right decisions, including a 48% figure that say they have no confidence at all. 7 in 10 Democrats, just under half of independents, and only 14% of Republicans say they have no confidence. Across regions, the share having no confidence ranging from a high of 56% in the San Francisco Bay Area to a low of 39% in the Central Valley. 2 in 3 African Americans and half of Latinos say they have no confidence in President Trump, compared to fewer than half of Asian Americans and whites. 4 in 10 men say they have no confidence, compared to a much higher 55% of women who have no confidence in his ability to make the right decisions for the country's future. We asked this question initially in January 2017, right as he was taking office, and findings are shockingly basically the exact same. There's been very little movement, either positively or negatively, about Californians' confidence in his ability to make the right decisions. Which shouldn't be surprising if you look at his approval rating over time, as well as Congress's. You see that there's been very little fluctuation. And this is consistent with what we've seen for the most part at the national level. There's been a little bit more fluctuation as of late, but in California, we find that Californians have not only held this kind of almost stagnant view of his job performance, but also it's highly partisan divided. I'd be remiss without noting that this is technically a high point for his approval at 32%. His previous high was 31%, so it's not like it's a big change. And to put it in perspective, his low is 25%. So it's just a very narrow band of how Californians feel about President Trump. If Congress approval is similarly low at just about 3 in 10. And if you're curious to the last time of when approval of Congress was higher than 3 in 10, you have to go back to March 2017, and that was 36%. And if you're curious about when's the last time Congress has had an approval rating of higher than 4 in 10, you have to go all the way back to May 2009. And we first started asking this question interestingly, right after I started. First read of this question was in October 2005. And since then, we've asked this question a total of 68 times. And approval of Congress has been above 4 in 10 a total of 4 times. And so it's been a just consistently low approval ratings of Congress. And that's basically considering that you've seen kind of control of the House, control of the Congress, in general kind of switch back and forth over that time period. So Californians' opinions are just not very high of the body of Congress in Washington. 3 in 4 Republicans approve of President Trump, and 1 in 3 Republicans approve of Congress. Just 12% of Democrats approve of President Trump, and 18% approve of Congress. Independents, fewer than 3 in 10 approve of either. President Trump's approval is highest across all demographic groups among whites at 43%. And if you look at Gallup, a recent Gallup poll, President Trump's approval was at 38% compared to 32% in California. If you look at Congress, we're actually more likely to approve of Congress at 29% compared to 21% in the recent Gallup poll. So that will be interesting to track as more Democrats are going to Washington. So it will be interesting to see what happens with that, to see if maybe there might be higher approval. So there's been much fanfare of the role that California has played in helping switch control of the House of Representatives from Republican to Democrat. And I find it interesting that it's only 53% that say that this is a good thing, considering the state of affairs and the kind of the way that California overall voted for Democrats in the midterm election. 1 in 4 Californians basically say it makes no difference who's in control, and 17% say that the switch is a bad thing. 8 in 10 Democrats and half of independents say it's a good thing. 56% of Republicans say it's a bad thing. And actually 3 in 10 Republicans say that it doesn't make a difference. Women are much more likely than men to say that this is a good thing. And half or more outside of the Inland Empire say that this is a good thing. And interestingly, about 4 in 10 of younger Californians age 18 to 34 say that it doesn't make any difference. And so this kind of younger group of people aren't necessarily buying into the idea that just because it's a switch, that's necessarily a good thing. So while 53% say that the switch is a good thing, we find that about half of Californians want their member of Congress or their member of the U.S. House to actually work with the Trump administration, while about 44% say that they want their representative to push back. 9 in 10 Republicans, half of independents, and 3 in 10 Democrats want their representative to actually work with the Trump administration. Majorities of Asian Americans and whites want their representative to work with the administration, while majorities of African Americans and Latinos want there to be a pushback against the Trump administration. Men are more likely than women to say that they want to work with President Trump, and this perception increases with rising income and age. In October, in the lead up, we asked a question about how would you want your member of Congress to, would you want them to work with or push back? And findings were basically identical at 48% to work with, 45% pushback. And so despite the fact that there's now Democratic control of the House, there hasn't been a shift in how Californians want their representatives to behave when they go to Washington. So now turning to an issue that seems to always be in the news nowadays, immigration, we find that Californians continue to have positive views overall about immigrants in the state, with 72% viewing them a benefit because of their hard work and job skills, and just under 1 in 4 viewing them as a burden because of their use of public services. Since January 2013, we've seen about 2 in 3 Californians hold this view. Prior to that time, this was always a finding that I remarked of how stable it was, but it was the fact that it was a much smaller number. It always tended to be on the positive side that they're a benefit, but it normally kind of fluctuated between low 50s to maybe mid 50s, and it was very consistent over time. As you can see, and then since about 2013, you've seen it grow. As I mentioned, there's a big partisan divide here. However, beyond parties, 6 in 10 or more across regions and demographic groups say that immigrants are a benefit. On the higher side tend to be Latinos at 86%, lower income Californians at about 8 in 10, and about 8 in 10 of those in the San Francisco Bay Area view them as a benefit. On the lower end, just to show you how pervasive the kind of positivity about immigrants are, on the lower end is whites at 60%, less than 40, greater than 40,000 at 67%, and the Inland Empire at 64%. So even on the low end, it's still a pretty high number. Solid majorities say that they are a benefit. So looking beyond a kind of overall opinion of immigrants and at kind of a policy context, we find that Californians are even more positive, with 84% saying that undocumented immigrants who are currently in the United States should be able to stay if certain conditions, stay here legally if certain conditions are met. We've asked this question probably 6 times, I believe, since January 2016, and each time it's been higher than 8 in 10 saying that they should be able to stay. In the past, we've asked a kind of 3-pronged question. Should they be able to stay and get citizenship? Should they be deported? Or should they be able to stay without citizenship, basically? And we've asked a number of different questions there, and always it's been a positive on the should be allowed to stay, with some kind of differential regarding, should it be with citizenship or not. There's actually bipartisan agreement on this, and this has been consistent with each of the time we asked it. Today, we find that 6 in 10 Republicans actually think that they should be allowed to stay if certain requirements are met. And I think that's where the actual kind of debate would come in and what those certain requirements are. And we actually find that more than 3 in 4 across regions and all demographic groups say that immigrants should be able to stay, undocumented immigrants should be able to stay if certain requirements are met. So this is another area where you see a big divide between what's going on at the federal and the national level compared to what the state and how Californians feel about this. This is one of the areas, of course, where we've seen numerous lawsuits between the two sides, and so this is definitely an issue that isn't necessarily going away anytime soon. Turning to another somewhat contentious issue, government regulation of business. When asked about this, if government regulation is necessary to protect the public interest, or if it does more harm than good, 6 in 10 say that it's necessary to protect public interest, while 1 in 3 says it does more harm than good. There's a wide partisan divide between Democrats and Republicans here, with independents kind of falling in line with the overall finding, with nearly 6 in 10 saying that it's necessary. Positive views of government regulation is higher in the San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles, and Central Valley than in Orange, San Diego, and the Inland Empire. African Americans and Latinos are more likely than Asian Americans and whites to hold this view. And this positive perception of the impact of government regulation of business declines with increasing age. Given the role that California plays in environmental policy in the United States and around the world, we've often asked a second question that specifically looks at environmental laws and regulations. And similar patterns exist here, with majorities saying that environmental laws and regulations are worth the cost, and about 1 in 3 saying that they cost too many jobs and hurt the economy. I think what California has done over the last, say decade or so when it comes to this, as well as the corresponding economic growth, I think hasn't really had an impact on how people answer this question, surprisingly. And we find that majorities across demographic groups say that these laws and regulations are worth the cost, that women are more likely than men to hold this view, and that there's an increase in this positive view as you go with rising age and education. Looking back, since we first started asking this question in 1998, I think like 7 out of 8 or 8 out of 9 times, it's been about 6 in 10 saying that environmental laws and regulations are worth the cost. And this is consistent with findings that we found in our July environment survey, that Californians have consistently had positive views about not only kind of laws and regulations, but kind of very progressive ideas that the legislature has put forth over time. And that's a survey we've been doing now for 15 years, I believe, and Californians have consistently held very positive views. And so in conclusion, with a landslide victory in his rearview mirror, 4 in 10 Californians approve of Governor-Elect Newsom's plans and policies from what they have heard so far. As Gavin Newsom makes plans for his new administration, nearly half say that they want him to take different policy direction than what Governor Brown prescribed. Majorities of Californians place a high priority or a very high priority for new state spending on universal health coverage, and about half say that about tuition-free community college and universal preschool. Californians say that improving jobs in the economy is the most important priority for the future, and many believe that children will be worse off than their parents. Most Californians say that the election outcome of Democratic control of the House is a good thing, and about half say they have no confidence in President Trump. Overwhelming majorities of Californians view immigrants as a benefit to the state and think there should be a way for undocumented immigrants to stay in this country legally. So at this point, I'll open it up, and I'll only ask that you wait for a microphone so that the folks that will be watching this on video later might be able to hear your questions. So. No questions. Oh, I prepped all that time of all these. Oh, we have one, yes. This is going to be a hard one, I can tell. He was reluctant to ask it, and now it's going to be a tough one.
I'm not sure how much analysis you do from your seat, but it seems stunning to me that with the landslide in his rearview mirror, as you put it, that Governor Newsom has such little support for his policies. Have you given any thought to how that could be?
I've given it some thought, not a very extensive thinking, but I do think that we'll probably, if I were to think about it, I would say that when we ask kind of a more general approval of his job performance in January, I'll bet that that's actually probably a little bit higher, and that moving forward it may be a little bit higher. But the way this question is, it's about his plans and policies. So you have a full third saying they're unsure of how to rate him, or they don't know enough. And so I would guess that as you track it moving forward in January and March and May of next year, that you'd likely see a higher share of Californians approving, although I bet probably still about 1 in 5 are going to say that they're unsure, especially in the early months, which is probably a reasonable response. Yes, sir.
About your sample.
Yes.
I thought I saw 1,300, 1,400, and 1,100.
1,700 Californians,
yeah,
and just shy of 1,100 likely voters. And if you looking at registered voters, that's probably just over 1,300 registered voters.
Yeah. And you periodically referred to the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and the
Yes.
Central Valley. So how is the sample apportioned between areas?
That's a great question. Actually, we weight to the regional breakdown as well as education, party and other factors. And actually, it most of the time it ends up being very spot on, where the 9-county Bay Area tends to be right on target at about 17%, Los Angeles at about 27%, Inland Empire 11%, Orange, San Diego 16%, and so on and so forth. So that's something that we do weight, but also it's the fact that that in general, even unweighted, the findings aren't all that far off just because of the way it normally breaks out. But those are great questions, and actually in the near the end of the report online, we actually have a map that illustrates exactly which counties are part of these, because obviously, it's kind of easy for Los Angeles since it's a single county, or Inland Empire, or Orange, San Diego. But the Central Valley, I've had some questions over the years of like, well, what's included? And, and as a transplant myself, been here 13 years now, I also was like, well, what's the Central Valley? And, it's this expansive, large thing that includes where we are today, but also way down in Fresno. And so from time to time, we'll also break out the Central Valley into, Sacramento Metro, North Valley, and whatnot. And so those are always interesting to look at.
Hi there.
Hi.
I was wondering if you asked about engagement or familiarity with policy issues before you asked their opinion on those policy.
Yes, so that's something we do from time to time, especially in our special topic surveys. Like we'll ask, how much would you say you know about Common Core, or about, blanking, not climate change, but, just like some of the climate policies. But for some of the more general things, we don't necessarily do it. We kind of think that the familiarity question is great, especially if it's something that you're just not sure that a lot of people know about. Like cap and trade's a great example, right? Because it's one thing to ask a question about, do you think cap and trade's a good thing or a bad thing? well, if you have 54% or whatever of Californians who don't know what it is, maybe it's more important to look at those who at least say that they know at least some about that measure. So that's definitely something where it's appropriate, we tend to ask those questions. And as with many other things, we would like to ask more questions, but sometimes you're kind of limited given the time and cost of surveys. So, yeah. Well, thank you all. If you have any other questions, feel free to come up and chat. Thank you.